Social media scientists. You're watching Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. So I was talking to my brother about the crisis. We were having kind of a little bit of a heated discussion. And he said, "You think that I don't know anything, but I follow an epidemiologist on Twitter." And that kind of got me thinking about, scientists on social media. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I just want to start off by telling a little bit of a story. So when I was going to university, I lived with this guy, and he was the hardest working person that I knew. Like, he was always studying. He was always focused on his books. He was always in his room. He was always studying. And sometimes he listened to music, and I went to a concert with him once or twice. But otherwise, if he wasn't studying or he wasn't doing his work, that was his life. And so he ended up graduating pretty well, probably top of the class. And then he went and got his PhD, and he spent some time at Yale. And now he's a research scientist at a really big pharmaceutical company. And so I just think of him as the sort of ideal of the scientist, and about this person who is so dedicated and focused on the work that he doesn't have time for anything else. And this guy would have never spent any time on social media. Maybe he had a Facebook account or something, but he wouldn't be on there tweeting about all these things that he was interested in or talking about at the time. And so obviously this is an extreme example. This is just a one person that I know. This is the ideal of what I have, or what I imagine scientists are like. I think that the real good scientist is this person who's focused on their studies. They're always reading books, they're always doing experiments, they're always learning more about their field. And they probably don't have time to be popularizing their ideas, popularizing their science online or on the internet. And if you're always focused on the work, then do you have time to post on social media? Do you have time to build an audience? Part of the reason why this might happen is that it's so much more common for people to get degrees. Even now, people have to get masters and PhDs just to qualify for jobs, which you could have had a high school degree for in the past. But there's this need for credentialization, for more and more qualifications before you can get a job. And so this means that more and more people sort of follow careers or go down the educational path than maybe did before. And some of these people might be going down this path because it's what they're good at, it's what they're supposed to do, it's what they need to do, but it might not be what they're necessarily passionate about. It might not be what they really want to do. It's what they can do and what they have the skills for, and so they go down that path. And so this creates some people who have credentials, who are in these positions, who might not actually be interested in the science of it, right? They might be interested in the policy of it. They might be interested in the management of it. They might be interested in some other aspect of it, right? But the point is that there's a huge group of people who are in fields who maybe wouldn't have pursued those fields if life was a little bit different. Another thing too that's kind of changed the dynamics of how science works. Now, to be a researcher, you have to be really good at getting funding. And so it used to be that you could just be a good scientist, right? You have your head in the books, or you're in the lab and you're just doing research and you're spending all this time doing it. But a lot of times now, scientists, at least in schools and stuff, they need to get funding. They need to be able to convince other people who have resources and funds that what they're researching is important and worthy of their time and resources. So the people who are better scientists, or who are more popular scientists, are the people who are the best at getting funding for the research they want to do. And obviously this isn't how it always works. This isn't how everything works, but this is definitely part of it. And so there's a selection. There's a selection for people who are really good at science, and there's this other alternative selection for people who are really good at getting funding for the science. And the more that the research depends on funding, the more that the qualities that are good for getting funding become important, that they dominate the industry, that they become the types of people who continue to be scientists are the ones who can get the funding, who can keep the research going. But the basics of that, right, is that it's changed from being a thing about problem solvers into funding solvers. And again, I said this isn't everything and this isn't everyone, but there's a certain level of necessity in being able to fund your research that has a priority over the research itself. I guess at this point, though, I want to say that this isn't all bad, right? This is just a little bit of a difference in dynamics. So, you have the scientist who's really good at research is one system. You have the scientist who's good at finding funding is another system, and you have the scientist who's on social media, who is on Twitter, and that's a different system. And the point here is, the key here is that all of these things are different systems. There's different dynamics. There's different qualities that make someone a good sort of lab scientist. There's different qualities that make someone a good funding scientist. And there's different qualities that make someone a good sort of social media scientist. And this is the thing that matters because all of these systems have different dynamics, and so they select for different types of people. But the idea is that like potentially or likely the person who's the best scientist is not necessarily going to be the best at popularizing it, and they're not going to be the best at getting funding for it. And so this creates this like dynamic where the people who are the most visible, who have the most say, who have the most sway in the public opinion aren't necessarily the most qualified people in that. But I just want to sort of swing back to the Twitter or the social media thing. It's like if someone has the time to be really successful and popular on Twitter, they might not have the sort of the cutting edge knowledge because they're maybe not working in the lab. Maybe they read the papers on this stuff, but they're probably not like doing that research. And obviously that's not going to be the case for all of the scientists who are on social media who are popularizing science. Like there's always exceptions to every rule, but like just as like a general thing, like if someone has time to spend a lot of time on social media and they have enough time and they have these sort of the resources or they have the skills to develop an audience, then like the fact that they can build that audience, that they can get those followers, that they can do all of that stuff, like that's at the expense of the research of the things on like the other side of the equation. And like again, social media is like a popularity contest. Like the reason why people go to social media is because they're like looking for like these sort of like more popular opinions. They're looking for these opinions from these that they're interested in and curious about, but they're not necessarily going to get the best, most accurate facts. And a big thing too about Twitter is like it's very political, right? Like there's a certain type of political position that is common amongst people who use Twitter. And so like you must have that political persuasion, that political opinion to be successful there. Not completely the case, but mostly the case. And so like there's always these factors that are determining the success within a system that aren't necessarily the factors that we should be selecting for, right? Like social media is essentially a popularity contest. Like science is sort of almost by necessity like the best idea contest. And the problem is that even though like pure sort of the most base form of science is going to be based on like the best science, on the best facts, the best evidence, but it's still a popularity contest, right? Like it's always affected by people, and people are always prone to falling into like political or social games that distract or take them away from the pursuit of truth and knowledge. If we just kind of like go into the grander scheme of things, right? Like the kinds of people who lead countries and organizations, or they are the sort of experts, like these people are like politicians. And when I say politician, I mean someone who is involved in politics or in politicizing things. And that doesn't have to be like left or right politics, but it is a sort of a manipulation or of like the working with people, the framing of thoughts and ideas, the directing of policy and action. And that is what I would see as politics, whereas science is on the back burner to that, right? Like these people who tend to get to the top of the pyramid are more likely to be better, like say politicians, than they are necessarily like experts in the lab, experts at the science. It's like the skills to be good in the lab and the skills to be a good popularizer, sort of politician, are different. The idea is that we always hear about the people who are the popularizers, and we probably are less likely to hear about the ideas of like the really like serious researchers, scientists in the field, because they're too busy doing that work to be like going out and trying to talk about it and popularize it with the masses. And I can say that just from my own personal experience. Like I'm an expert in what I do from a technical perspective, but I'm not good at being a politician. I'm not good at selling these ideas to the people in my organization. And so this is why I believe this, is because it's true for me. And I know it's obviously not true for everyone if it's true for me, but I think that I'm probably a good example of why this happens and why I feel this way and why I can observe things this way. And obviously sometimes people have both skills, but generally there's going to be the popularizers and there's going to be the doers. And the doers are not going to be the popularizers. And this is what's the key here, is that so anytime you go on social media, anytime you go on Twitter or Facebook and you hear like you see really popular scientists or whatever, it's like these are the popularizers of those ideas. They're not necessarily the people who actually do the work. They're not necessarily the best, sort of most expert people at that topic. They're just the ones who are the most equipped to talk about it. And so that's sort of what I think about social media scientists or Twitter scientists. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. If you are curious about being told how to think about things, but you don't want to be told what to think about them, click that subscribe button because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time.